In this episode of Derp Star, I gave half the sharks in the Oceanus Dimension laser beams, and made them work with the player's deflection shield. I'll start by making a new scene for the laser mount. I'll use a sprite as the base node and set the texture. Then I'll add a Line2D to make the beam. I am using a texture rect for the player, but I'll be refactoring it because the line works much better. You can click in the editor to add points, or you can manually set them in the sidebar. So I'll set the first point to 0, 0 and the second to 500, 0. Then I can move the line up to the muzzle. You can change the width if needed, but 10 is good for this. Then I'll set the end cap to rounded, which makes it look more like a beam. Now, if you set a gradient, it'll fill the colors from left to right, but I want it to stack up and down instead. So I'll make a new gradient texture 2D in the texture, and make a new gradient here, and then drag the point in the top right down to the bottom left. Then, in the texture mode, you can set it to stretch, and the texture is displayed there. Now the blue is showing through the white because you need to set the default color to white as well, and then the true colors will show through. Now I'll set the outer two colors of the gradient to orange. And lower the opacity. And then I'll add another point in the middle for red, with the alpha all the way up. And in the raw data, you can set this to exactly 0.5 on the offset. Now that looks pretty good. You can also lower the alpha on the default color to make it more transparent. So I think that looks pretty good. Next, I'll add an area 2D for the beam area. And I'll add a collision shape set to a rectangle. I'll set the Y extent to 5 and the X to 250, so it's the same size as the beam. And then I'll set the X offset to 250 as well, so it starts at 0. And then I'll move the whole beam area up to cover the line. Next, I'll attach a script to the beam area, and I'll add a variable for the faction equals enemy, and the DPS equals 10. Then in the physics process function, which is called every frame, I will for body in get overlapping bodies, connector deal damage, and then we'll pass the self, body, and DPS times delta. So the deal damage function is in the preloaded, the auto-loaded connector class. So it just does some validation. It makes sure the target is valid, and it has the take damage method, and the faction of the source does not equal the target faction, and then it deals damage, otherwise return false. Now I'll make a new inherited scene from the base shark bumper and drag the laser mount into the scene, and then I can move this onto his head. Make sure it doesn't cover up the gills though. And I'll go ahead and save this. Then in the Oceanus dimension default biome script, I'll add the new mob. You can just drag and drop it from the browser. So, like so. Now when I run the Oceanus dimension, about half the sharks spawn with lasers, and the beam areas are doing damage. Now I just need to make them interact with the player's deflection shield. So now I'll add a position 2D to the beam area and name it max length, and I'll set the X offset to 500 so it's positioned at the end of the line, and then in the script I'll add a length and max length variables, which is 500 by default. Then I'll make a function to set the length. So we'll check if length is greater than max length, set L equal to max length, and then we'll set length equal to L, and set the collision shape X extent to length over 2, and the position offset as well. I also need a function to set the maximum length. So assign max length to M, and then set the max length offset equal to max length. And if the current length is greater than maximum, I'll call the set length. Next, I'll attach a script to the laser mount and get the direct space state on ready. So get world 2D dot direct space state on ready variable, and in the physics process, the start point is equal to the beam area global position, and the endpoint is set to the max length position 2D. So then we'll get the result of the space state intersect ray, and we'll go from the start point to the end point. There are no exclusions, and I'll use the fourth collision layer because that's where the player's shield is. So if result length equals start dot distance to result dot position, and then I'll call the set length on beam area. Else, if the beam area dot length does not equal max length, then I'll set the beam area length to the maximum. Oh, this is an elif, so beam area dot set length, and then get the max. Then I'll enable visible collision shapes in the debug. And when I activate the shield, you can see it changes the collision shape of the lasers. So now I just need to redraw the beam to stop at the shield. So I need to set the second point in the Line2D equal to the length Line2D dot points at 1 dot x equals length. Otherwise, if it's max length, I'll set the position equal to the beam area max length position. So now, when you use the shield, the lasers stop at the shield radius. It's kind of hard to see because they move so quickly, but it does look like it's working. Then in the beam area, I'll make the faction an export variable. I'll add the activate function, which sets the collision shape disabled to false, and set the physics process to true. And in the deactivate, I'll do the opposite, so I'll set the collision shape disabled equals true, and set physics process to false. Then I'll save the branch as a separate scene, and I'll add another copy. I'll name this deflect area, and then I'll set the faction to player here, and in the laser mount ready function I'll set the deflect area to deactivated. I'll deactivate the deflect area, and then I'll do that if the beam is max length as well. Now I already have the code for the deflection in the space worm laser, so I'll copy that segment into the laser mount script, and I'll change deflect to deflect area. We'll set the position to length and set the maximum length to beam area dot max length minus length, and then the incoming direction is result dot position minus the start point, and then we'll set the deflect area global rotation to the incoming direction bounced off of the result dot normal and converted to an angle, and activate the deflect area. Oh, this is just max length, so I'll try that again. This should be position.x for the endpoint. So now when you activate the shield, the laser is deflected off at the angle opposite of the collision. So now I just need to finish drawing the laser. So I'll add a third point to the Line2D and set it to the same position as the second. Then in the laser mount class, I'll get the local coordinates of the endpoint relative to the Line2D. So I'll do Line2D get global transform dot xform inverse, and then I'll find the deflection area dot max length dot global position. So this just finds the coordinates relative, and it takes into account rotation, which is really nice. And I'll set the Line2D points at index 2 equal to the local chords. And if the length is equal to max length, then I'll reset the second or the third point to the max length position. So now when you use the shields, the lasers are deflected and deal damage to the sharks instead. That's all for now, but I'll be adding some underwater naval mines next time. Thank you for watching and have a great day.